Hello and welcome to another episode. Today I have brought back with me Børge Fagerli. Børge, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Great. I was actually bombarded with messages on my Facebook for a request on doing another video with Børge Fagerli on Myo Reps in English this time, as we did a previous episode in Norwegian. So Børge, before we start, could you give us a short background about yourself?
A short background.
A short background.
Okay. Well,
Let's start with how you got interested in exercise and when you began training.
yeah, I guess the usual story for those who have listened to podcasts with me before is that I grew up not really excelling in anything. I was always second best, or at the most second best in everything. So, but I always had a knack for academic pursuits. I learned to read when I was 4 years old, and doing advanced math when I was just in first or second grade or something. I found my father's math books from high school in a closet and just devoured them. So that's kind of where my abilities came to shine. So I guess I started, the usual way, just watching Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and I just one day saw this cover of Flex magazine, and I was just amazed at the muscularity and the size of these guys, and I just wanted to kind of look like that, or become strong and big. So I started out actually training, serious growth training, Bulgarian burst training, for those who have heard of that, with Leo Costa many years ago, and it was actually a high frequency and pretty high volume too program, and that's actually when I made my best gains. And it's kind of funny that after 25 years of training, I've come full circle, and I'm doing a lot of the same training principles in my own programming today that I did when I first started training. So I guess you can say that there's not much new under the sun. We know a lot more now than we did 25 years ago, but it doesn't radically change the way we approach training. So yeah, I think that's the shortest summary of my background. I was when I'm interested in something, when I get passionate about something, I want to figure out everything there is to know about it. So I just dove into the books and the research, and approached knowledgeable people on it. I've been both mentored and having friendship with many of the top guys in the industry today, including Lyle McDonald was one of the first ones, Brian Haycock in the hypertrophy specific training days, which is also very similar to how I train today. And now, most recently, Menno Henselmans and Ari Witten, which is, those two guys are my closest friends and colleagues and partners in a couple of very interesting projects that are going to be released within probably the next couple of months.
Yeah, I actually remember the first article you wrote on HST was probably back in, when was it?
Yeah, it must have been 2004, I think.
Yeah,
So
something like that.
12 years ago.
Yeah, that's when I started spamming your mailbox with questions.
Yeah.
So it's great that after so many years that we're sitting here and having a discussion on Myo Reps, and we'll also talk a bit about high frequency training at the end of the interview.
Yeah.
I also understand that you used to all your toys, you used to pick them apart from each other to see how they were built up, and that used to frustrate your parents.
Yeah, that's true. That's just one of my things. I need to figure out how something works, and if I can put it back together and make it work better, you know. And that didn't always go well, but, you know, especially advanced electronic toys, when you pick those apart and try to put them back together, they don't always work at all. So,
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of what I've been doing with my own body. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, but, you know, when it comes to other people, I tend to have a high success rate with, you know, making people progress faster than they ever did before, and just basically, yeah, finding their optimal way of eating and training. So,
Yeah. I understand you also competed yourself in bodybuilding.
yeah, I was into powerlifting for a few years, but mainly being strong in deadlifts and squats at the time. Then, you know, I wasn't actually competitive. I was not very strong for my body weight. So, and I also quite unsuccessfully competed in bodybuilding. But I think at the end, you know, my last contest, I was in really great shape. And even though the first place guy was like 15 kilos heavier than me at the same height, I'm still happy with the way I looked. And I managed to show everyone that I can also get myself in shape. So, but I don't think my body is really built for my connective tissue health, and everything is not really built for lifting heavy or gets to a certain point, and you know, I just tend to burn out. I'm also very overambitious when it comes to my own body, and the coach's paradox. You know, you're not a good coach for yourself, but you can coach others. So I tend to do a lot of stupid things with myself. So, but it was a great learning experience, and just learning how to push your own limits, and also I like to have walked the path myself before telling others how to walk the path. So I at least have some sort of real world experience with it, and not just a theoretical approach to everything.
Yeah. That sounds like good advice. Okay, let's dive into the questions, and we're going to talk about Myo Reps today. Could you first start explaining how you came up with Myo Reps and what's the concept behind it?
It started out after reading some occlusion research. Yeah, it's like 10 or 11 years ago now, and that's when the first version of Myo Reps was created, and it was based on this max stimulation protocol of Dan Moore. And I had a long, you know, email dialogue back and forth with him, where we included both Matthias Wernbom, who is one of the top researchers within that area, and also the author of one of the largest meta reviews on strength training. We also included Brian Haycock and a couple of other guys, and just had this really awesome conversation going that I saved in a document, a Word document that's hundreds of pages long, just digging deep into all of these mechanisms and you know, what signaling mechanisms are involved, and what is important, and how can we explain the high growth rates in occlusion training, and just trying to put the pieces together. And the first version of Myo Reps was actually just more of a cluster training approach, where you were supposed to do sets of 5 with short periods at your 10 RM, and later evolved into, you know, working the first set, the activation set that I refer to it as, close to failure, so that you achieve high motor unit recruitment, according to the Henneman principle that most of you probably already know. And then just extending that set, or maintaining that high level of recruitment by inserting short rest periods. They're long enough to allow you to do more reps, but short enough to maintain that sort of balance between fatigue and recruitment. So you can keep going basically and adding more. You're basically just replicating the last few reps of the set over and over again, for as long as it takes. So yeah, and I also relied on some personal data and research from Wernbaum that was never actually published. He did a lot of cool stuff in his lab where he would, do a Myo Rep set in a leg press machine, doing 50 rep sets and just all sorts of crazy protocols, and then just hobble over to the microscope and inserting this biopsy needle into his leg and drawing out this piece of meat that he could study and see what happened. And it's just a crazy guy, but also a very kind and warm and friendly, and also highly intelligent and huge individual. So I really admire that guy. He did a lot to make Myo Reps into what it is today, basically.
And I understand that a lot of coaches are using this protocol with their athletes now.
Yeah, it's very surprising actually. It has gone viral. Basically, it's if you go on YouTube and do a search for Myo Reps, you can find people all over the world doing it, and coaches like Scott Toussaint and Brian Cron, they did a podcast with me last year, and they've been using it themselves and with their clients, and yeah, it's basically spread all over. I've seen other coaches using it with their clients, but not calling it Myo Reps, kind of taking credit for it themselves. But it's the exact same protocol. And it's also very similar to dog crap, Dante Trudell's DC training concept, which is a rest pause method, but it's also very different in some important ways. It's also been used in many personal trainer studies all over the world. I have people sending me emails saying that they just learned about this in Australia or New Zealand and USA and everything. So it's kind of cool that they've included it in the curriculum for international personal trainer studies.
Yeah. I actually remember when I first started doing the dog crap program a couple of years ago, and when I read about this concept of Myo Reps, I saw some similarities, but I also, like you mentioned, saw some differences with it. I don't know if you actually used that protocol, the dog crap program, earlier.
Oh yeah, I used to talk with Dante Trudell also, and worked with one of his trainers for a while, just to sort of get a feel for that program too. Just to point out the main differences is that DC training works in a lower rep range, around 5 to 10 RM. And you are supposed to go to absolute complete failure in 3 sets with short rest periods. So it's something like 8 plus 5 plus 3 at a given load, where you go to failure and just have 15 to 30 seconds of rest between sets. And so where Myo Rep differs is that it uses lighter loads. And there are 2 reasons for that. One of them is that at heavier loads, you don't actually need to do Myo Reps, because you already have such a high fiber recruitment from the very first rep or after only 2 to 3 reps. Whereas at lighter loads, you need to go closer to failure. When you get into the 15 to 20 to 30 RM range, that's where you need to go closer to failure to achieve that high fiber recruitment level. And that's also where all that fun stuff with occlusion training is going on. the metabolic effects. Because there are like two primary mechanisms for hypertrophy. One is the mechanical tension, the actual amount of tension that you place on a muscle. Like, I always say that a muscle is just a dumb piece of meat, and it reacts to how strong you pull on it, basically. And so metabolic effects where you use a lower tension and you don't get that strong mechanical signal, you can amplify that mechanical tension signal by adding a metabolic stimulus to that. And that seems to be why occlusion training works. Occlusion training, to give a short explanation of that, is when you put something similar to a blood pressure cuff around your leg or your arm and pump it up to a pressure that partially occludes the blood flow to that limb. And then you can see robust muscle growth walking on the treadmill. And what happens is that occluding the blood flow and restricting oxygen to the working muscle will enhance the muscle recruitment at a given load, or it will speed it up. So whereas you would normally be able to do, say, 50 reps with a given load, let's say a leg extension, when you add occlusion to that, you can only do 30 reps. And you see these spikes of muscle recruitment with an EMG. And that metabolic stimulus seems to amplify or complement or even work in a synergistic fashion to the mechanical stimulus. And we have seen some very impressive growth rates with occlusion training. It also seems to increase the satellite cell activity. A brief explanation of that is that when you have a muscle cell, you have given amount of myonuclei, which is the command center of the cell. And to increase or expand the size of that muscle fiber, you need more command centers. And the process to get more command centers into the cell is by activating the satellite cells, which are dormant stem cells adjacent to the muscle fiber. And when they're activated, they fuse together with the muscle cell and donate their myonuclei to the muscle fiber, and thus allows it to grow larger, expand. And in beginners, this is a process that it's part of the initial hypertrophy adaptations. Whereas when you get more advanced, this satellite cell process stops, it stagnates. And that seems to be one of the mechanisms why you reach an anabolic resistance threshold, where even, the elite lifters, even when they're doing really heavy training and lots of eccentrics and lots of volume and even frequency, then you still don't get a robust muscle protein synthesis signal going. Or you can see a MPS signal, but you don't really see any robust long-term muscle growth. It seems to just stagnate. But we have seen that in occlusion training, you can restart that satellite cell activity. There's not sufficient data to conclude that this is 100% guaranteed, but we have seen it happen, both with occlusion training and also extreme stretching protocols, where you stretch a muscle and put it under load, which is basically also an occlusion type stimulus, because you having tension on the muscle for so long will also occlude blood flow to it. So to sort of tie all ends together here, with Myo Rep training, you don't actually need an occlusion. You don't need to put a blood pressure cuff or elastic band or knee wraps or whatever people use to do occlusion training, because you achieve internal occlusion by just contracting the muscle and keeping it under constant tension. You occlude blood flow to it, and you achieve higher rates of muscle fiber recruitment at an earlier point. And if you do it correctly, you can maintain that high recruitment so that you expose all muscle fibers to that mechanical tension, and then you make it grow, basically.
Okay, so a couple of practical stuff, like do you implement it in your training program? What exercises can you use the Myo Reps protocol for? Because I think a big difference between this and, like you mentioned, with dog crap training, where you do the rest pause set, is that you take it to complete failure. But I think the exercise selection also is a bit different, because when you do the rest pause set, it is mainly compound movements that you have in your program when you're doing a DC protocol.
Yeah.
So can you explain a bit about, is it something you do for all your exercises? Is it something you do for a couple of exercises in each session? Which exercises is it appropriate to use it? Which exercises is it not practical to use Myo Reps?
You can do Myo Reps on everything, but at least if you have a death wish, because I mean, doing Myo Reps on deadlifts and squats is, it's just gonna be, it takes some balls to do that, because you run out of breath way before you reach that high fatigue threshold that you need to be at. Some people can do it and have done so successfully. I know Mike Tushiri used Myo Reps in a lot of his programs, and he's creating world-class lifters with his programs. But I tend to recommend using it on exercises where you can keep a constant tension, to get the occlusion effect and amplify it. And then we're kind of looking more in the direction of isolation exercises and not so much compound exercises. And there's also that safety factor, because since you're at the failure point and you try to stay there, and suddenly that fatigue threshold just hits you like a brick in the face. So you being in the squat rack and doing that is not going to be a good idea, because you just suddenly stop. You can't move. You can't contract that muscle anymore. So for a compound leg exercise, I would prefer a leg press instead of a squat. But other than that, like bicep curls and pec deck flies and tricep push downs and all the exercises like leg extensions, leg curls, where you can keep that constant tension and not have not being able to rest in the top or the bottom position, and also not having the lower back being a limiting factor. So that kind of excludes bent rows, for example, and not having such a high stability requirement that you waste a lot of energy getting the weight into the correct position. So for instance, dumbbell bench press, you're going to have some spotters ready or some other way of getting the dumbbells up into position easily, because you spend a lot of energy getting those dumbbells from your knees and up into position to be able to press them. And so what we have found is that you need to keep the rest periods sufficiently short to maintain that high fatigue level. So when you put the weights down and it takes you forever to get them up, you're kind of getting into a territory where it's not really any advantage of doing Myo Reps anymore. And also something where, like I said, if you run out of breath, you run out of oxygen, because you're going to do at least 12 to 15 reps when you're doing Myo Reps, and sometimes up to 30 reps. That's going to take a toll on your lung capacity. So picking exercises that you can go to that rep count and still, have oxygen, it's kind of crucial to make it work.
Okay. I also like how do you do it with your clients, for example? Like, do you have them doing Myo Reps for a couple of exercises during a program week, or do you have periods where you use Myo Reps in all the exercises?
I would say that's a very individual thing. If I'm working with someone who's kind of feeling burnt out, they've been lifting heavy for a long time, I can actually just have them take a few days of rest and then ease into a Myo Rep program for the next 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks. So training Myo Reps exclusively and then going back into heavy training. I can also add in Myo Reps on the smaller muscle groups. So in like a 2-split or full body program, I can have them do Myo Reps on lateral raises, on bicep curls, and tricep pushdowns, on leg extensions. I can also have separate days. That's one of my favorite setups that I also discussed on my article, Reignite Progress with New Science on Elite Fitness. Where I have 1 day of moderate rep training and exercises suitable for that, and 1 day of Myo Rep training and exercises suited for that, mostly isolation exercises, and then follow that up the next day with heavy low rep training in the 3 to 6 rep range, depending on the client. And the reason for that is that some data have shown the satellite cell activity after that type of training to peak after 24 hours. So if we want to sort of activate the satellite cells, we also want to make sure that they differentiate and, fuse together with the muscle fibers. So in theory, at least, you would want to add a mechanical stimulus after a period of 24, maximum 48 hours to take advantage of that. So that's why I sort of like to do some Myo Rep training for a given muscle group or the full body for that matter, and follow that up with heavy training the very next day. Okay.
And would you say this is suitable for both advanced people and beginners to use, like Myo Reps?
I would not use it for absolute beginners because it's so brutal and it's not really needed. Because an absolute novice or a beginner will grow just fine from 1 or 2 sets to failure. But as you get into the sort of novice intermediate range, then you can start playing around with Myo Reps. Because you kind of need to know where your failure point is. You need to know what it feels like to go to failure. You need to know that you're actually maybe 1 rep from failure. You're not 5 reps from failure. So you kind of need to learn how to train sufficiently hard and intense to reach that point where Myo Reps actually works. But I have seen some pretty impressive results with Myo Reps. So even though I've seen arguments spanning from, Myo Reps doesn't really differ from just doing regular high rep sets and, achieving that high fiber recruitment and, sort of maintaining that level. That doesn't really, it doesn't really work better than just having 2 to 3 minutes of rest between sets. But in practice, I think most people who have tried it will definitely disagree. It does seem to work much better than just doing some regular high rep training sets, and it also works much better than just doing low rep training over and over and over again. And it has to do with that whole blood flow occlusion effect, where when you put the weights back, everyone who has tried to do a Myo Rep set, I actually tend to do this in my seminars and my workshops. I have people do or demonstrate Myo Reps with bicep on arm, and then we just sort of, when that person has finished doing the Myo Rep set, I just talk for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and then I just sort of point to the guy who just did 1 arm Myo Reps, and his bicep has swollen to almost double the size, and it just looks stupid. I mean, looks like one arm is a bodybuilder or arm wrestler for that matter, and the other arm just belongs to a normal person. So that pump is just amplified massively due to the occlusion effect, creating this environment where blood just rushes to the area, and you just get a crazy pump that's like nothing else. And that added blood flow will increase a lot of the sort of the whole growth factor, blood flow aspect of things, and because I strongly believe that connective tissue health is one of the major limiting factors in a trainer's or a trainee's long-term progress, where you can't just keep hammering the heavy loads. It gets to a point where things start hurting, especially when you're progressing fast. And that's because the connective tissue has a lower blood flow than your muscle. Your muscle is highly plastic, whereas your connective tissue, your tendons and your ligaments and everything, takes longer to adapt. And so ensuring that you have blood flow, sufficiently high blood flow to that area, delivering nutrients and oxygen and repairing it, I think that's vital for long-term progress. So there's that added benefit of just increasing blood flow to the area and increasing recovery.
Okay, excellent. Okay, final question, and this is not in regards to Myo Reps, but I know that you use a rather high frequency with your clients. Could you explain a bit about that? How you practice the high frequency training?
Yeah, sure. I adjust this according to the level of the person I'm working with. I adjust both loads and also the frequency. And I know you're going to have Alexander Kirketeig on to talk about the frequency project, and so I'm not going to go too deep into that discussion, but looking at the whole area of muscle protein synthesis and anabolic window and all that stuff, where you see the MPS response post-workout is at the same level, whether you're a beginner or an advanced. But as you get more advanced, that anabolic window or the growth period of the muscle tends to shorten. So the total area under the curve, or the total muscle growth from each individual workout, just shortens and goes from approximately 2 to 3 days for a beginner to just 24 hours, and even down to 6 to 8, maybe even 4 hours in some research has indicated. And so that alone points to the validity of increasing your frequency, imposing a stimulus more often. And because some people might argue, well, you can just do more sets, do more volume or lift heavier loads. Well, there's sort of a practical limitation to how heavy you can lift and how much volume you can do. And there are studies looking at pretty extreme protocols doing 8 to 12 sets and 6 sets of high load eccentrics and just everything in between. And it doesn't prolong that anabolic window at all. You see it returning to baseline after 6 to 8 hours, even with these extreme protocols. But what you see going on is a lot of connective tissue damage and repair. That soreness, that's even though we don't know exactly what's causing all of it, it can just be a stimulus that you're not used to, but it does seem to be a connective tissue inflammation response. And hence why I was referring to that earlier when I said that for long-term progress, you also need to take into account the inflammatory response created from training and how it affects your connective tissue. So if you can't train, then you basically can't impose another stimulus to that muscle. And so everything, and then as Kirketeig is going to explain because they were looking at strength, but they also showed that hypertrophy was much better in the group training 6 days per week compared to 3 days per week. There are a lot of caveats with that study, as I'm sure he's going to go into. And I know tradition dictates that some people are still doing 2 splits and training, even at the advanced level, they're still just training their each muscle group once or twice per week with great success. But I have seen dramatic improvements in growth rate from using high frequency training in intermediates and advanced. And so it kind of goes from a scale of in beginners is not needed. The only reason to use high frequency training in beginners is for the skill aspect. You get to practice lifts more often. But high frequency training as it pertains to muscle growth is not really needed until you get into the advanced level. But like we talked about the other day, if you tell people that, this only applies to the 5 or 10% of you that are advanced enough to even be able to grow from high frequency, then everyone thinks they belong to that 5 or 10%. So it's kind of hard, because as soon as you start talking about it and it sounds really great and productive, then everyone is doing it. And until you are ready for it and you can actually get results from it, and you have the connective tissue health, and you have the stress management and the nutrition, and you have everything in order to actually be able to tolerate and to grow from it, then I wouldn't recommend it at all. So it's very context dependent. And also, some people will do maybe, let's say, eight sets twice a week for legs, or even 10 sets twice a week. And then they think, well, I'm going to add 1 or 2 extra training days because this high frequency training sounds so awesome. Or they're even going to do daily squats. Plenty of people have tried that and written articles about it and books. And then you think, well, since I'm doing 8 sets twice a week, I can do 8 sets 4 times a week. Well, you can't, because you just double the volume, the weekly volume. So you need to break that into smaller segments. And again, we meet that whole connective tissue aspect of things, where the inflammation created from each training bout takes longer to recover from. And so I think you actually need to scale down the whole volume aspect of it if you're going to have success with high frequency training. And you're also going to need to vary your rep ranges and your exercise selection to avoid overuse injuries. And because some people tend to think that as you get more advanced, there's like a minimum threshold that you need to cross to even get your muscle to respond. But I think that threshold is a lot lower than most people think. I think you can actually, just by going 1 or maybe even 2 sets to failure, you can actually create a sufficiently high muscle protein synthesis response, and also avoid that connective tissue damage that will allow you to sort of train more frequently. And also varying between the heavy loading and the higher rep stuff will ensure that everything in the whole system is working as it should. It is operating at top efficiency. You have the energy substrates available, the glycogen, you have the blood flow, you have the mitochondrial efficiency, and you also have that mechanical stimulus imposed on the muscle, just basically stretching and contracting that muscle hard enough to create that whole cascade of signaling events that in the end creates a robust muscle growth response. And so there's, I have an online course running now, and it takes me like 4 weeks to just cover this material, to have the knowledge base required to evaluate and to set up a proper high frequency program. And even the Norwegian powerlifters, the reason they can make high frequency training work is that they're working at a lower average intensity. They are working at, their working sets are in the 70 to 80% range of 1RM, and they're doing sets of 3 to 4 reps at that load. and adding volume with sub-max loading. And so they're not imposing such a high demand on the recovery reserves, and also working into it gradually. You know, they don't just jump straight into high frequency training. They sort of build up to that. So I would say for anyone interested in trying high frequency training, you should have a daily undulating periodization approach to it, where you vary your rep ranges, and you should start at the minimum effective volume. And I think just try 1 or 2 sets before you decide to even move up. Because what do you do if you do 6 sets per day and that stops working? You know, you stagnate. Even if you can recover from it, do you then start to do 7 sets or 8 sets? I mean, where do you go from there? So I think it's a good idea to just focus on long-term growth. I have seen this in my own clients. First, you have sort of an optimal volume, weekly volume, and you split that up into daily workouts. And so you see incredible growth rates the first 4, 6, even 8 weeks. And then people start to sort of slow down, and also these minor aches and pains and even injuries start to crop up. And so some of them are just, you know, banging the head against the wall for the next 6 to 8 weeks, and in my opinion, just spinning their wheels. It's like trying to drive a car with a handbrake on. And I've done that. It just smells really bad. And so I think just starting with a lower volume and not being overly ambitious in chasing that volume and going crazy with the intensity and everything, and going hard into failure and all that stuff. I mean, it requires perfect recovery if you're gonna recover from that. If you're gonna actually have a productive, if you're gonna get some growth from that at all. And some people even tend to undereat because they're too concerned about their 6-pack. And so start at maybe 2, maybe 3 sets if you're really ambitious and think that you can recover from that, and see what happens. And so have a longer term perspective on it, because if you can keep getting stronger and growing for the next 6 to 8 months instead of the next 6 to 8 weeks, that's going to be a lot more healthy for both your mind and your physiology. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent, Børge. Actually, I don't have any more questions, so thank you so much for coming back and doing another interview, this time in English.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add a little comment.
Yeah.
As it pertains, because I get a lot of questions on this, and I have published a Norwegian ebook on Myo Reps which explains this. And so for all the English-speaking audience, until I get that ebook translated, my prescription has been simplified a lot for Myo Reps. Now I tend to test people their 1 rep max in an exercise, or a 3 or 5 rep max, because it can be uncomfortable to test your bicep curl for a 1 rep max. I think most people can tolerate that, but still, I tend to test people in the 3 to 5 rep max range and estimate the 1 rep max from that. And I prescribe the intensity for Myo Reps according to that. So I will prescribe a range of 30 to 50% of 1 rep max as the starting load for Myo Reps. So if you're more advanced, you should probably do 50%. If you're less advanced, you know, intermediate in that category, 30% is going to be sufficient. And so that will dictate the rep range. So instead of saying, well, do 15 to 30 reps, I just say, well, start with this intensity, do as many reps as possible at that load, and then you do 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 sets with 3 to 5 breaths of rest in between those mini sets. So an example would be 22 for the first activation set. You you put the load down, and you take 3 to 5 deep breaths, and then you do, let's say, 4 reps, 3 to 5 deep breath rest, 4 reps, and so on until you stop. So you either end up doing 5 additional sets, or you do something like 4, 4, 4, 3. So you stop as soon as you lose 1 rep from the initial. So anything from 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 to 5, 4 is correct. You see where I'm going with this? Yeah. So I think I just basically say, go to failure, then 3 to 5 times 3 to 5 with 3 to 5 breath rest. That's the prescription for Myo Reps, and it seems to work the best.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Where can people find more information about you?
I have a Norwegian website, borgefagerli.no. I also have a very unfinished website, borgefagerli.com. But I think as soon as we get the cyberneticfitness.com project launched with Menno Henselmans, I'm going to start publishing a lot of my material there instead. I'm probably going to have my borgefagerli.com site just redirect to that site. So I hope to both have my translated Myo Rep book ready over time, and other than that, just follow me on my Facebook page. I have one private and one official coaching page, and the official coaching page is where I put the most of my information almost on a daily basis. So those are the primary places to find.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'll put the description for your website and for your social media sites in the description below. Once again, Børge, thank you so much for your time and doing this interview again. And
Pleasure.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.